First time I saw Tales of Hoffmann, I was 11 or 12 years old when it played at the Sutton Place Theater in downtown Manhattan. I had grown up in the Bronx, and I had an aunt and uncle who were going to take me downtown to, for dinner and a movie. And I wanted to see, there was a new Tarzan movie out, and that's the one I wanted to see. And they said, no, we're going to take you to this. This will be a whole different thing for you. Trying to educate me, turn me on to the arts and classical music and all of that. And I went to see the film and I was knocked out. It was like being in a dream or something, and it's the first film like that I'd ever seen. I hadn't seen The Red Shoes, I hadn't seen any of the Archer's films. And I just was enthralled by it and always remembered it. Some of the imagery just sticks with you. Anyone that sees that film just remembers some of that incredible imagery. And then there used to be a movie show in New York called $1 Million Movie. They would show a movie twice a night and then 3 or 4 times on the weekends. And so you could, if you wanted to, you could watch this movie all week. And when it came on, that's what I did. I just sat there. It was in black and white because this is before color television. But I still was just knocked out by it. And I really got to know it and got to know the music. And I immediately went out and bought an album, which is it was 3 LPs, and it was the entire soundtrack. And I played that till it was scratched and bumpy. And it's just been one of my pleasures ever since then. I'd seen an opera. The same aunt and uncle had taken me to see an opera, and actually I'd seen a ballet. But I was never interested. I was this Bronx kid, tough guy, didn't care too much about it. And the film just put it all in such a dramatic context, and it made it just come to life. And you could appreciate how those art forms could actually tell a story. It was the first music video, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's really what Tales of Hoffmann was, the first music video. It was all done to playback, and so that was probably very liberating, not having to worry. And I'm sure Michael was talking to them the whole time that they were shooting. The idea of being able to tell a story in such a sort of an abstract way with mixed media like that, using opera, using dance, and using these amazing visuals, and the set designs are just gorgeous, and the color palettes for the different stories are just so wide, and the whole thing just made me realize what an expressive form film could be, and that you can borrow from all these different mediums and glue it all together and make something spectacular out of it. And I never thought that I could ever make movies. I thought you had to be born royalty. I always loved movies, but never thought that I could ever be a director or in any way be a working professional. And it took me a long time to come around to that. It wasn't until I went to college to study painting and design and went to a school that had a theater department, transferred, and did a couple of years of theater, and then just got fed up and left without graduating. And in those days, I was in Pittsburgh, and I grew up in New York, moved to Pittsburgh to go to school, and I still live there. But in those days, cities the size of Pittsburgh had film laboratories. There were 3 film laboratories there. And the news was on film. This was before videotape. So that's what I did. I dropped out of school and I went and started to live at one of these laboratories, basically, with these journeyman cutters, with smoking cigarettes over the flammable glue pots. And that's how I learned the medium. But I had all this recollection. The same uncle that had taken me to see Tales of Hoffmann had a little Bell & Howell wind-up movie camera. And so I would experiment. When I was in high school, I'd mess around with that and experiment, try to make little films, never thinking anything would ever come of them. Nothing ever did. But I just wanted to try. And a couple of times I double-exposed some film, and I realized, gee, that's what Michael did in Tales of Hoffmann. Some of the tricks that he used were transparent. They were accessible. I could see how it was done, reversing the action and overprinting, that sort of cubist thing that he does with the dance, shooting it in all those different angles. And I could say, gee, that's all you have to do is be creative with it. And that transparency that just sort of brought me into it, I was able to understand a little bit about how to make a movie, the very sort of raw beginnings of it. But it gave you a sense of how to use what knowledge you have of the way it works technically to your advantage as a storyteller. When I first saw the film, I wasn't that amazed by it, like the dance of the dragonfly, overprinting over the leaves and so forth. It was unique. I mean, it was something that I sat there at that time and tried to figure out how it was done. But it wasn't anything that blew me away like a special effect, like I would go see a science fiction movie or The Thing, and some of that stuff would blow me away. How did they get that high shot with the flying saucer in the ice, I just thought they were tremendously expressive. I just remembered these fantastic landscapes, the Greek island and the stairway that the doll dances down, a carpet or flat on the floor of the stage, and those forced perspectives and tearing the doll apart when Coppelius tears her apart, and you could see. And on some prints, you can still see the black. They just sort of covered parts of her in black and the leg sticking out through a curtain. As sophisticated as it is, it has this sort of innocent approach as far as the technical approach that he took to it. He took sort of the simplest way and said, I'll try that. And that gave me a whole kind of an understanding and things that I still use today. I mean, if I'll try to find a simple approach to something, and then sometimes I'd say to myself, how would Michael have done this, faced with this problem? And we only have so much time, So, okay, stick your head through a cloth. I did a scene in Creepshow where Carrie Nye has her head served up on a platter with birthday candles on it, as though it's a birthday cake. And I just sort of draped everything under the tray with a black velour, thinking consciously of that moment in Hoffmann where she gets pulled apart. The design is incredible. I mean, it borrows from, Miro. I mean, it borrows from all sorts of painterly styles. And, the Venetian sequences are just stunning to me. That when she's walking down over the statues, the skulls, that's an image that I'll never forget. And little techniques that he used, like when they're fighting, during the sword fight there, it's just slow music, and yet the action is very fast. And those counterpoints, and there are just constant little surprises in there. And all of that made me say, boy, you can really break the rules. You don't need to have fast music and fast action at the same time. It's full of surprises every moment, right from the top. That scene where Lindorf walks into the theater and just goes around the 3 chairs and then following the little tassel on his cape all the way into the tavern. Michael's just such a wonderful storyteller. And, to just take you through that way. I was very interested to see other things that they had done. I hadn't seen Peeping Tom or Black Narcissus or any of those things I didn't see them for years because there was no access to them. The only way you could access films in those days was you had to rent them. This was pre-video. So I would go down, literally rent a 16-millimeter projector, take it home, and rent a 16-millimeter print of a movie. And they happened to have Tales of Hoffmann. So I rented that film probably 50 times. And came to find out later that Marty Scorsese, who also loves the film, would go down and try to rent it. And sometimes I'd go down and it would be out. And they'd say, oh, this kid Scorsese has it. And he's since told me that when he would go try to rent it, if it was out, I had it. I think we were maybe the only 2 guys that were renting that movie in New York. We should have gotten together, we could have saved some money and had a good time watching the movie. I thought that Powell and Pressburger had the color in their films was it just seemed rich. I wasn't educated enough to start looking for palettes and the use of, this is yellower and this is bluer. It took me a long time to start appreciating the use of color palette. And in fact, the film that I just finished this year, I was thinking of Hoffmann, of, when do I go a little blue? When do I make it a little more garish? When do I, make it a little yellower? And it's really only now that I'm starting to, get that sophisticated. It took me a long time to learn how to move the eye and how to, cut from one thing to another. And always, it's a very parasitic medium. You don't get a chance to sketch. John Ford made, a couple of 100 movies, and I'm sure he had a lot of tricks in his hip pocket by the end of that. I've done 15, so I feel like my pockets aren't quite full enough with tricks. There's something about all three tales that I love. You know, you go back to your memories as a child and the first impressions that came to you, and I loved the fantasy elements the most. I loved the doll story, and I loved Dr. Miracle, and I loved that whole sequence with the violin. And I thought Robert Helpmann was, you know, just incredible. The moment he gets on stage, forget about it. But I was slow to come to the tale of Julieta. While it was spectacular and while I liked aspects of it, you know, the fencing and the images that I remembered, some of the operatic things were a little boring, and some of those effects I didn't think worked too well, changing the wax into diamonds. There are some that are actually done by a sleight of hand magician, and then there are others that are jump cuts. And those were a little disappointing. I thought I could have done those better. So I was a little slow to come to that one. And then I just came to love it. I mean, that thing where they're all walking around that rondel or whatever it is in the end is just such spectacular, beautiful music, and, you know, just the way it's staged, and just, you know, that's just slowly walking around and circling each other. I just fell in love with that. And then, of course, the image, you know, the vampiric nature of it, and the key, and stealing the soul, and, you know, and I gradually, you know, fell in love with that one. I think now I like it the most. Well, the Antonia sequence, I think, is disappointing to a lot of people because it is very much just the opera. And the two of them, Robert Rounsville and Ann Ayres, are not sort of movie star, gorgeous. And I think that maybe that's a little disappointing to just pure movie buffs who just want a little more romanticized image of the characters. And of course, some people complain about the lip syncing and the close-ups of Robert Rounsville and so forth when he's just singing. Of course, I float right over it. I just love it. I love the whole thing so much that I get right past it. As a kid, I didn't think he was quite macho enough. He ain't Robert Mitchum. He does have these, terrible things happen to him, but it seems that there's some sort of a mystical force. I mean, that character, the Robert Helpmann recurring character, seems to be his nemesis throughout, who, you know, one wonders, why does he have it out for this guy? And that always disturbed me a little bit. I always wanted to know a little more about that. That was just my, sort of logical side of me, wanting to know why is this guy so star-crossed, and why is this other guy constantly after him? You know, this guy either has a major grudge, or there's something magical going on and that's happening to Hoffmann, that he's just never gonna get there. He's just drew the black marble, he's in the shadow of some dark star. So those are all thoughts that were going through my mind, but I still think that he could have been stronger. He does a couple of heroic things, the sword fight and getting the key, and, he sort of snaps out of it here and there. The Antonia sequence was cut down, I think, but it was always in the film. And when I first saw it in theatrical release, it was always there. I remember the island. I remember just thinking that it was spectacular, and the backdrops were spectacular. And again, them coming across on the boat, it's so transparent, that was all done on stage and all done with backdrops. And of course, so was Black Narcissus, which is just a knockout when you see, Tibet on a soundstage, but it just puts you in the place. As fantastic as it is, and as otherworldly as it feels, you still definitely get a sense of place. Much more so, even, than some of those, Earth to the Moon movies, where they would try to do lunarscapes or whatever. I mean, it just puts you completely in the place. And it's pretty interesting that, design of a backdrop is enough. Obviously, it's theatrical. I mean, you could be watching it at the Met. But that theatricality of it, you wouldn't think that would hit, a young person, but it sure hit me. It was just enough to, say, okay, here we are. The canals, that beautiful image of the gondola just carries you away. The film definitely has a very dark side, and having grown up on EC comic books and horror films and sci-fi and all of that, I categorize this somewhere in there. It's not over here. It's not, off that shelf entirely. I mean, you can go all the way back to, Frankenstein, But the ones that were impressing me in that period in the 50s, you know, when all these sort of science fantasy films came out, you know, that science is going to kill us, the bomb is going to get us. And, you know, of course, on real TV right around the same time, John Cameron Swayze was telling us all that the Russians have the bomb. And so there was this cloud over that whole period when I was really starting to get involved with the Tales of Hoffmann and watching it more and more. Maybe the darkness in it was heightened or brought out by the times and what I thought we were going through. Even at school, I had to duck and cover, you know. So I know that there was an influence, another influence on me, which maybe sensitized me a little bit to the darkness in the film. I think that there are elements in it that could be right out of a horror film. The idea of the doll being alive, you know, it's like an android. A little science fiction there, and it has all those elements. And I always say the Hoffmann character is the greatest Dracula that I think has ever been on screen. I mean, that just his eyes and the collars, the big collars, and you know, that thing that he does, it's just horrifying. And there are definitely horror film elements in it. Slightly post-apocalyptic, that business of walking down over those, that what apparently are corpses. The idea of stealing a soul and, you know, the key and cracking the mirror are all sort of science fiction, sort of classic horror elements that are in there. I don't know that opera audience, I don't know that, you know, classicists would see it that way, but as a kid, I certainly did. And I think those were the elements that originally attracted me to it when I was taken to it instead of being taken to Tarzan. Gee, this is cool. I think a film like Peeping Tom had more of a direct influence on what I do and what I'm known for, because I'm known for scary movies and for being a horror guy. But Tales of Hoffmann is the film that made me want to make movies. I mean, it made me want to find out about how to do it and find out about how to use the pencil. I mean, it's really the film that gave me sort of that little prod to actually go do it instead of just sitting around and wondering about whether I could or not. Well, movies that you love, I think, just never get old. I mean, movies that I love, I can just watch and watch and watch forever. I love them, I fall in love with them, and I can be with them, you know, it's like a favorite child or something. I can sit and watch that movie right now and probably again tomorrow, you know. It just always is a pleasure.